Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to connect Git on your Windows computer to GitHub and GitHub servers so that you can start committing code to private repositories and sign your commits using SSH. So you should at this point have Git installed on your computer, and if you open your web browser you can visit GitHub. So just go to github.com and Google it. And GitHub is just a platform that allows you to use Git to submit version controlled code into their servers, and they save it for you and provide a lot of free services so that you can have your code in the cloud and then download it from various places, share it with people, different things like that. There are other providers of Git. You can even self-host Git servers, but a lot of people use GitHub, and there's a good reason for that. So I'm going to go ahead and sign into my GitHub account. And if you don't have one, you can sign up. I recommend signing up with your university email. If you can't access your university email after you graduate, or your college email, then you'll want to make sure you change that before you graduate. And if you have a GitHub account with a personal email, you can always go into your settings and change to a university or college email so that you can access certain features that are only available, or programs that are only for students. So I'm going to hide real quick to type in my password. And then I'll need to use my two-factor. I recommend having two-factor authentication because I think GitHub is going to start requiring it if they haven't already. So you may see different things when you log in depending on if you've used GitHub a lot before. But if you go to the avatar up in the upper right and click on your repositories, you can create a new one, and that's what we're going to do, is create a new, I'm just going to call it Playground, and make sure you make this a private repository because that's going to help you to tell whether authentication is working. And I wouldn't add any files here unless you know what you're doing, because sometimes that can create problems when you go to do your first commit, depending on how you set things up. So now that I've done this, we'll see there's 3 ways to authenticate or download this code. And remember, because this is private, only I can download this code, or only people who I add to this repo can download it and commit to it and such. So you can download GitHub Desktop, and they provide a really easy solution for visualizing and managing authentication and stuff like that. So that's one option. And then there's HTTP, which a lot of people will use. It's kind of like the default easy thing to do. And then there's SSH. You can also download repositories as like a zip file, but that's not generally recommended because you're not going to be able to commit back up if you have contributions to something. So let's see if you use the HTTPS version. We'll just go into Git Bash, and I'll show you what that does and why it's sometimes going to be a problem for you. So if you type git clone, this is how you clone a repository, and then I'm going to do shift insert, or you could right click paste. It's going to try to clone, and it's working on authentication, and it should pop up with this Git credential manager that we installed when we installed Git on Windows. And you could proceed with this method, but here's a problem that you might face in other contexts. So let's say you're working on a remote server, like you used SSH, the secure shell, to log into somebody's server who you have access to, and you want to bring in some code that you've written and deploy it on their server, for example. You might not have a desktop environment. You might have what's called a headless environment, where you're literally just communicating with that computer over the command line through SSH or some other type of shell environment. So in that case, you might want to authenticate a different way. And you could use one of GitHub has some sort of like passcode method that might work, or different options. But I strongly recommend using the SSH method, as this will also give you kind of a briefing on authenticating with SSH that you can apply when you start to log into remote servers, which is something that you'll probably do for other purposes. Windows comes installed with SSH and a bunch of SSH tools like SSH keygen. So if you just type in SSH, you're going to have that command already installed, hopefully. And if you need to, there should be a way you can install it using some, just Google it, and Microsoft probably has some standard docs on it, but it should be installed. And that means you can also use it from PowerShell or the Windows CMD command prompt. So we're going to specifically be using this tool called SSH keygen, which is a different program, and it's going to help us generate key pairs that we can authenticate with GitHub. So it's important to know where you want to put all of these files, and some of these things can be confusing, but generally the place you're going to want to put SSH configuration files is on your main hard drive under the users folder with a capital U and then your username. And in there you should have a .ssh folder, which is going to be the expected place to keep things personal to your computer user, and that computer user's SSH authentications. So you see that's the path that we're looking at. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to VS Code and open this folder so that we can see the files that are being created when we're interacting with the command line. So I'm going to paste in this address right here and select that folder. Sorry, I'm going to hit enter on the directory above and then click on it. Okay, .ssh is the folder we want. And now when we have the terminal opened in this window and we do pwd, we should be in that C users user.ssh mount point through git bash. And that's that standard folder. So on VS Code, there's a standard extension called remote SSH, and so I'm going to uninstall that to show you what that's like when you go to try to connect to an SSH server. So you click this little two arrows down in the lower left, and you have different types of remote windows you can connect into. One of those is SSH. So for example, you want to write some code on somebody else's server, you might use SSH to do that. So it's going to install that extension, and then you're going to need to add a new SSH host. So that's what we want to do because we don't have any configured, and so you're going to use that standard command line format to specify that. So SSH for GitHub, the standard way they ask you to test this is using SSH git, the user git at github.com, and you're going to use the -T when you want to test that, but for now we'll just put that basic thing, and it's going to show you two different SSH options. So this is why I emphasize that you want to use this user configuration, because this other configuration is for this sort of system-wide configuration of SSH, and you want to focus on the user-specific one. So it added a host. We can open that config, and in fact we're in that exact folder. So it created a file called config, and it added that host. So the other thing that we're going to have to do is add an identity file, and this is going to specify the SSH key pair we want to use. Well, we don't have any key pairs yet, so we're going to have to use SSH keygen to create those keys. Now, if you want to see all the options for this, you could do man SSH keygen, hopefully. Oh, we don't have man here, but you could just Google man SSH keygen, and then I'll give you the manual, the Linux manual for that keygen program and all the different options you could use, and there are different cryptography options. I'm just going to give you a standard one that works pretty well, which is SSH keygen, and then you're going to specify the key type with -t ed 25519. I don't recommend using an older format like RSA, because the newer the cryptography standard, usually the better if it's well validated. And then you're going to specify the file where you want this key pair to go. And it's going to create two files, but you just have to specify the base that you want it to use. So -f // because we're in this .ssh folder, and we'll specify the name of git auth, and I also want it to be a sign key. It's going to ask for a passphrase. And it creates those two keys. Don't show anyone your private key. Use your public key to tell GitHub who you are. So I'm going to delete these because I also want to show you how you can change this. See user at Matebook, how you can change this name that gets added to the key. You could also add a -big C comment and add something like Nicholas G, my name, when I create that key. And that's just going to add the comment to the public key right there. So we'll Control A, Control C to copy that, and we're going to have to give this to GitHub, because right now if we try to do SSH-T for test git at github.com, we have no, we just said yes to say we want to add GitHub to our known hosts. We actually trust GitHub and we want to connect to them, yes. And then it's still saying that we're not authenticated. So okay, well maybe we need to add this identity file. So we copy the private key location, which is the thing that we're going to use to authenticate ourselves, and copy the path and then paste that, and then maybe we'll be authenticated, right? But still no. And the reason is because GitHub doesn't have our public key. So go back, make sure we copy the public key, and we go to our settings in GitHub. So avatar, settings, access, SSH and GPG keys, and add a new SSH key. I'm going to call this Matebook Auth. This is an authentication key, not a signing key, and we'll paste that key and hit add. Now GitHub has our public key for when we try to authenticate. And if we go back, we should now be able to, authenticate. And so it says we've successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide shell access. So that's what we're looking for. And I can even get rid of this git part of the git before at github.com, because I've given a name to that. That's what the host part says. So I could call this, technically I could call this anything like HHH and save that and do SSH-T HHH, and it knows what I'm talking about because I've specified it in here, but I recommend just leaving it as github.com. One important point here, if you haven't used VS Code too much, if you make a change and you see this dot, that means it's not saved. You have to use file save or Control S to go ahead and save that file, or you can just activate autosave, and then any changes you make will be saved. You don't have to save, and you don't see that dot. That's why. So everything's being changed right away. So that's just a personal preference thing. But Control S or autosave to make sure you save things. Just because what you see is there doesn't necessarily mean that's what the programs are going to see that you're running in the terminal. So now we know we can authenticate with GitHub. So at this point you should be able to download and commit to private repositories. And so that's kind of step one. So let's make sure that we can do that. If we go to documents, I'm going to just create a new code folder to keep things clean in my documents. And then if I go in the terminal, I should be able to go to cd, and this is like users folder, and I'll cd into documents, and then I'll cd into code, and then list. There should be nothing in there, and this is where I'm gonna clone my repository. So if I go back to the new repository, I'll take that SSH part and git clone this. So I'm not in the SSH folder, reminder, I'm in the code folder in documents. So now I'm creating another subfolder called playground that's coming from GitHub, and I'm gonna enter my passphrase, and it let me clone that. So I cloned an empty repository, which I knew. I'm gonna do code playground. So this is gonna say use VS Code. Code is the shortcut for VS Code program, and open playground folder. It's gonna put a new window, and there's nothing in there. So for here, if I now open the terminal and try to commit something, so let's say I do hi mom.txt, hi mom, and I say git status, I have a file that's untracked, so I need to git add either that file, hi mom, I hit tab to complete that, or can do git add dot to add everything in this dot folder, this current folder, and do git status now. I have changes that need to be committed. They've been added but not committed, so they're staged for commit but they're not committed. And then I'm going to git commit -m for message. You need to have a message anytime you make a commit. And then I'm going to say this commit was about saying hi to my mom. And we're getting this error. Please tell me who you are. Run git config, so it tells you exactly what to do. And you can follow this, you should follow this, but what actually is that doing? So that's going to change your user global git configuration file, another file that's kind of in a location you may or may not know about. So the standard location is going to be your main drive, users, so the same user folder of whatever your username is called, and then it's going to be called .gitconfig. It's just a file right in there. So I'm going to open with Visual Studio Code, and there's nothing in there. So I'll leave that open, and I'm going to show you what happens when I run git config. So I'm Control C to copy, Control V to paste. I'm going to give my email njg4ne@virginia.edu. So see it added, user.email equals njg4ne. And then I'm going to do the same thing with name, user.name Nicholas. I'm not sure, but I don't think it actually checks. It may check your email associated with your account, but it won't check. I'm not sure that it will check your exact name. So this is just so that when you're committing, it's clear who is doing that committing in your GitHub repo. So now let's try to commit. Alright, it let me commit, and if I get status, I'm using the up arrow to go to previous commands. My branch is based on main, but the upstream is gone. Nothing to commit. Let's try this. Git push to take those commits and push them up to GitHub, because right now if I look at my repo, there's still no code in there. So I've committed locally, but haven't pushed commits to the remote repository. It's a bit confusing thing about Git. So I'm going to say git push, enter my phrase, and it let me commit. So let's see what happens now when I reload. You see that code, that hi mom file with the one commit. If I click here saying hi to mom, so I see that this is here, but I know from experience this commit is not signed. It's not a signed commit. It's there, but it's not signed. So what's the benefit of signed commits? It's basically verifying that I am who I say I am. And you might belong to an organization that wants you to commit code, and they may require you to have signed commits to verify your identity for accountability purposes. So let's see how we can do that. We'll just use our same key. We could create a different key, but I'm just going to use the same key. So I'm going to again copy the public key, and we'll go to GitHub, settings, SSH and GPG keys, new, matebook, sign, I'm going to call it, signing key, paste, add. So now you have the same key actually in those two different places, but one is for authentication and one is for signing. So you might think, okay, so we're good to go, right? Spoiler alert, no. See what happens if we make a change to this. So I'm just gonna see git status. Now that automatically saved because I have auto save. We have a change not staged for commit. I want to stage that by git adding. I want to commit that by git commit -m and then saying removing emphasis, the exclamation part. And git push. But if I go back to that repo and look at those commits, still not signed, even though we've given GitHub that SSH key for signing. So the reason is that we need to specify in our git config how it is that we want to sign. There are different ways to sign your commits, and there are GPG keys you can use for that, but we're going to use an SSH key just to keep this simple and use the exact same type of key. So this configuration file that we're already using that specified our name and email, we're going to use to specify how we're going to sign this. And it's that same kind of command line method we can use to change this, or you could literally just type it out yourself. But I'm going to use the config method. So we're changing git config -- global, and we're changing gpg.format SSH. And there you go, it adds that. Then we're going to do user.signing key, and we're going to give it the path of our signing key, which is this private key. I'm going to copy the path, Control-Shift-V to paste. Oops, maybe I need to put that in quotes because it's clearly ignored some of the backslashes. There we go. And now it's adding double slashes. It's essentially just escaping the backslash to say that, hey, this backslash isn't to tell you about another character other than backslash, it's a backslash to tell you about backslash. It's confusing, but that's how it's doing it because of the direction of the slash, basically. And then finally we need to say git config global commit 1t gpg dot gpg sign true. So now we're all set up in here, and hopefully now we say hi dad 2. going to again see that we have use git status. We have unstaged changes and we have untracked files because we changed a name. So we're going to git add dot. That's going to give us the deleted file and the new file. And then we're going to commit that. Give it the message saying hi to both parents instead of just mom. And then git push. And now hopefully we have a signed commit. And there you go. We see verified. If you saw unverified, but you did see something there, it probably means you had signed the commit on your computer side, but you hadn't actually added that key as a signing key. So that's important. A signing key is different from an auth key. So you need to have if you have one key, you need to put it in both places. But now you've seen how you can authenticate with GitHub to private repositories. You can make commits in those private repositories even if you don't have a signing key set up, but you can go that extra step and get the signing key set up, and then you're going to be able to verify with your commits that you are the person who you say you are when you're pushing this code up to GitHub. So that should do it for this tutorial.